As we have seen, the Bible as we have it today was organized, agreed upon, and distributed since the 2nd or 3rd century. There's a marvelous fulfillment of Old Testament prophecies contained in the New Testament. But there were apocryphal gospels written that are not included in the Bible that we have today. There are two categories of these writings. Number one, the apocryphal gospels, stories about the life of Jesus based somewhat on the four gospels. And number two, the Gnostic gospels, writings that denied much of what the Bible proclaimed, especially denying the humanity of Jesus Christ. Let's begin with an examination of the apocryphal gospels.
A lot of the apocryphal gospels that are orthodox in nature tend to focus on the birth of Jesus, because again, that's very little detail in the gospels. So the pseudo-Matthew, for example, has many of the features that we recognize from the way we tell the Christmas story. You know, the manger, the nativity scene, the donkey and the ox, those features. The proto-evangelium of James is another influential text that gets into the whole pre-history of Mary. Her parents, Anna and Joachim, are named in that text. The visitation at the well, which is a common feature in medieval art of Mary, that she's wearing blue, that Joseph is an old man. All that is described in that text, and that has shaped how we come to view the Christmas story down to this very day.
They told some of the untold stories of Jesus' childhood, and therefore they were very popular in the Middle Ages. For example, Jesus and the birds. The kids were making clay birds, and Jesus did also, with this difference. After he composed his birds, clapped his hands, and his birds flew away. Or there was the story of Jesus and the kids in Nazareth playing King of the Roof. They would climb up on a roof and kind of tussle each other. Sometimes they would fall off. In fact, that happened once when a kid named Zeno got too near the edge and accidentally fell off. Then all the kids fled except Jesus. Well, the parents of Zeno see their dead son on the ground. They see Jesus on top of the roof, and they say, "You pushed him off." Jesus shakes his head sadly, comes down, talks to the dead boy, and says, "Zeno, Zeno, did I push you off the roof?" "No, Lord, you're in the process of saving me. Thanks bunches," evidently is the way this apocryphon ran. But other times, these stories really tend to get a little bit frightening. They're playing touch football, evidently, in a meadow north of Nazareth, and somebody gives Jesus a body block, and he takes it unkindly, zaps a kid dead. And the parents of the dead child come to Joseph and tell him, "You got to do something about your kid, or teach him to bless and not to curse." Or he doesn't like a group in the villagers which is scorning him, makes them all blind. Not exactly the Jesus that we know.
But what was the boy Jesus really like? When we examine Luke chapter 2 and the account of Jesus going to Jerusalem when he was 12, we find the following in verses 51 and 52. "Then he went down to Nazareth with them and was obedient to them. But his mother treasured all these things in her heart. And Jesus grew in wisdom and in stature and in favor with God and man." If Jesus grew in wisdom and stature and in favor with God and man, how could he have done many of the things mentioned in the apocryphal gospels? How could he have killed a friend and raised him from the dead? How could he have performed miracles when the Gospel of John says what Jesus did here in Cana of Galilee was the first of the signs through which he revealed his glory, and his disciples believed in him? The early church faced a big problem. How were Christians to know what was true and what wasn't?
So against the background of not having a canon, the early church fathers quickly saw that heresy could spring up very easily. And so from Ignatius of Antioch on, he was martyred about 112 AD. He was concerned that there always be this central teaching that all the Orthodox bishops of the church would recognize and pass on to one another, so they could always measure any aberrant teachings against the standard doctrine and then label it heretical.
There are over 40 known apocryphal writings, and the early church never considered any of these for inclusion in the canon. In fact, Popes Damasus, Pope Innocent I, and Pope Gelasius distributed lists of many of these documents and condemned them, the supposed authors, and distributors.
So there really isn't competition, you might say. It's firmly entrenched. Rather, there's a pastoral function of writings that don't clearly teach the gospel, that could potentially be misread and lead people astray. So it's a function of helping people find what's clear and avoiding that which is not clear. There aren't witch hunts, there aren't book burnings. They're just laying out what's the most helpful writings for the church to use.
The early church recognized the unique authority and message contained in the writings and letters of the disciples of Jesus, circulating around the churches in the first century. But already in the second century, many church leaders faced great challenges to the Bible's message, as other documents sought to connect their message to Christ and his disciples as well. The content of the infancy Gospels and others claiming to be written by the apostles was never quoted in the New Testament. They sought to fill in the blanks. But there was another group of apocryphal writings more challenging than that. They sought to destroy the historical faith, even the historical Jesus himself. Join us next time when we examine those writings called the Gnostic Gospels.